The moment he heard the muffled sobbing behind the break-room door, something inside him stopped. Jonathan Reeves had walked into that store expecting numbers, efficiency, and silent observation. As the undercover CEO of a fast-growing retail chain in Chicago, he had spent weeks visiting his stores disguised as a regular employee, blending in, watching, listening. But nothing in his spreadsheets or executive meetings had prepared him for the sound of a young woman crying like her world had just fallen apart. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unseen struggles, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us what truly matters. He paused outside the door, his hand hovering over the handle. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a dull glow over the hallway. It was early morning, just before the rush, and the store was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made emotions louder. Jonathan wasn't supposed to interfere. His role was to observe, not engage. That was the rule he had set for himself. But rules felt meaningless when faced with raw human pain. He gently pushed the door open. Inside, sitting on a worn-out plastic chair near the lockers, was a young cashier named Hannah Brooks. She had only been working there for 3 days. Her uniform still looked new, but her face told a different story. Her shoulders were shaking, her hands tightly gripping a crumpled piece of paper, and tears streamed down her pale cheeks as if they had no intention of stopping. Jonathan stepped in quietly, pretending to be just another coworker. He leaned against the wall, giving her space, unsure of how to approach without making things worse. But before he could even say a word, she looked up, eyes red, voice trembling, and what she said next shattered his heart. She whispered that she didn't know how she was going to survive anymore. Those words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded empty, exhausted, like someone who had run out of hope. Jonathan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He had heard complaints before about wages, hours, rude customers, but this was different. This wasn't frustration. This was desperation. Over the next few minutes, in broken sentences and quiet pauses, Hannah shared pieces of her life. Not as a formal conversation, but as a release, as if she had been holding everything inside for too long. She spoke about her mother, Margaret, who had been battling a serious illness for months. Medical bills had piled up faster than she could count. Rent was overdue. Their electricity had been shut off twice already. And now, the letter in her hand, it was a final notice. She wasn't crying because of the job. She was crying because this job wasn't enough. Jonathan listened, completely still. Every word she said felt like a crack forming in the polished image he had built of his company. In boardrooms, everything looked perfect. Growth charts were rising, profits were strong, expansion plans were aggressive. But here, in this small break room, reality looked very different. Hannah wasn't lazy, she wasn't careless. She was trying, desperately trying, and still losing. Jonathan noticed the way she kept apologizing between sentences, as if even her pain was an inconvenience. That was what broke him the most. The idea that someone could be drowning and still feel the need to say sorry. Something shifted inside him at that moment. For years, Jonathan had prided himself on being a smart businessman. He believed in efficiency, in results, in numbers. But sitting there, watching Hannah struggle to hold herself together, he realized something terrifying. He had built a system that didn't see people like her. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jonathan continued his shift, scanning items, greeting customers, pretending everything was normal. But his mind kept replaying Hannah's words over and over again. Every beep of the scanner felt heavier. Every transaction felt meaningless. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his luxury apartment overlooking the Chicago skyline, surrounded by everything money could buy, and yet, all he could think about was a girl sitting in a dim break room, wondering how to survive. The contrast haunted him. By morning, he made a decision. When Jonathan returned to the store, he wasn't just an undercover observer anymore. He was a man on a mission to fix something he had ignored for far too long. Over the next few days, he quietly began making changes. Not dramatic announcements, not flashy gestures, just real, meaningful actions. He reviewed employee wages, benefits, and scheduling practices. He spoke with managers, listened to other employees, and uncovered stories similar to Hannah's that had never reached corporate ears. Then, 1 week later, everything changed. Jonathan revealed his identity. The store gathered in shock as the quiet, unassuming coworker they had known stepped forward as the CEO. Gasps filled the room. Some employees looked confused, others nervous. Hannah stood frozen, her eyes wide as if trying to process what she was seeing. But Jonathan didn't focus on the surprise. He focused on the truth. He spoke openly about what he had witnessed, about the gap between numbers and reality, about the responsibility he had failed to uphold. And then, he announced immediate changes: higher wages, emergency support programs, flexible scheduling for employees facing hardships, and direct communication channels to leadership. When he turned to Hannah, his voice softened. He didn't see her as a struggling cashier anymore. He saw her as the reason everything needed to change, and the weeks that followed Hannah's life slowly began to stabilize. The company's new support program helped cover a portion of her mother's medical expenses. Her schedule was adjusted so she could care for her family without losing income. And for the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten: relief. But the impact didn't stop there. Other employees began to share their stories. A culture of silence was replaced with a culture of understanding. Managers became more attentive. The workplace transformed, not overnight, but steadily, meaningfully. And Jonathan, he changed too. He stopped measuring success purely in profit margins and started measuring it in lives improved. Before we reach the end, take a moment to comment "kindness wins" if you believe small acts can change someone's entire world. Months later, Jonathan visited the store again, not as a disguise, but as himself. As he walked through the aisles, he noticed something different. The atmosphere felt lighter. The smiles felt real. And when he saw Hannah at the register, greeting a customer with quiet confidence, he knew something had shifted. Not just in her life, but in his. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the smallest moments remind us of the biggest truths. Because in the end, it wasn't the numbers that defined his success. It was the moment he chose to listen.